This is the bonus episode of Race, Health, and Happiness, where I speak with Dr. Marcia Anderson and we talk about radical self-care. We amplify the words of poet Audre Lorde, who said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare." We have a crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And Malcolm X told us Black women are the most unprotected women. So as women, particularly as BIPOC women, we need love. And that starts from the self and extends to others. Enjoy. All right, so welcome to Race, Health, and Happiness, where we focus on how to stay well despite living in a racialized world, how to survive, but more importantly, how to thrive. And so today is actually part 2 of a 2-part episode that we have dedicated to the work and life of Dr. Marcia Anderson. Marcia, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you for having me again. And I'm doing good today. And, to the point of the podcast, I just am really thankful for being here because of how these moments of connection are such a major factor in me feeling more healthy and happy.
Oh, that's so kind. And I'm for me, it's the same. Now, although this is the part 2, probably I should just kind of help situate listeners if they didn't listen to part 1, but people should actually listen to part 1. I would highly recommend. But Dr. Marcia Anderson is a Cree Anishinaabe physician in Manitoba, a mother of 2 and a good friend of mine. And we in the last episode, talked about a number of different things. We talked about, in particular, anti-indigeneity or anti-Indigenous racism, specifically in healthcare. We talked about your experiences with your family in healthcare, and also your journey to healing from, some traumatic experiences, particularly with your father's illness and mistreatment in our healthcare system. But before we kind of jump into more about race, health, and happiness, and specifically, I'm excited to talk to you about radical self-care, which we didn't have a chance to talk about before. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you want to say to our listeners about yourself or the previous episode? Just anything that you want to share before we jump into radical self-care?
Sure. I think a few more things I would share with the listeners just so, they have a bit of context for understanding my life. And so the comments that I make, which are really rooted in my life experience, and so work for me and are relevant to me, and then they maybe have a bit more information to think about how that does or doesn't apply to them. I'm also a single parent. I have 2 daughters who are 9 and 6, and they are both my main source of joy and my main source of laundry. But that is such a major factor, and I think for me, one of my biggest motivations for the radical self-care is it's not for me just about how I show up in my work, but it's about how I show up to parent them and really wanting to show them that you can do this type of work. You can work really hard and also you can be, present as a good family member. So I think that was one thing that I wanted to share.
And yeah, I added that because a lot of our conversations, we talk about motherhood and parenting and what that's like in doing this work, and how we need to take care of ourselves just for the sake of ourselves, which is its own thing, but also for our family, for our friends, our students, et cetera, right? And thinking about community. So I really wanted to talk to you about that, particularly radical self-care, because this is a concept that I learned from you and later kind of read the work of Audre Lorde on the topic and then had been sharing with others. So actually it came up in the lecture yesterday with Dr. Suzanne Schuch, who's a Black Indigenous physician, and she was saying she learned about self-care from me, but I learned it from you. So please, if you would like to share with our listeners about what is radical self care.
Oh, thank you. And it's kind of funny to me because it wasn't anything that I had really planned to focus on or become known for. And then a few years ago, some of our team members in Ongamazon would make jokes about how, every meeting I would reinforce messages around self-care, or that I could always be counted on, to bring it there, or to just talk openly about my own. Um, and that makes me really happy, actually, right? So the team that I want to lead um, is really a reflection of what I want for myself in this area. Like, I want us to be excellent at what we do. And I want us to be healthy and happy, whole individuals, however we define that, in the context of our families, in the context of our communities, but that really we embrace for ourselves as well as for the people that we serve, our inherent right to joy. Um, and so to me, the radical self care is recognizing that we live in these incredibly difficult contexts where we experience racism, sexism, the patriarchy, homophobia, all these different forms of oppression, and that we are working hard to try to dismantle those forms of oppression at the same time as being, physicians for both of us, and that those two are linked, that we really can do that and be happy. It doesn't always have to feel like the heavy battle, although it often feels like that. And for me, recognizing how critical it was to have moments every day, as much as possible, where I felt connected to some sense of higher purpose, connected to my people, whether that is, my team, my friends, members of the Indigenous communities, members of the queer communities, but moments where I felt really connected and safe and held.
I like that visual that you just gave, and held, right? And that kind
Mhm.
of community love in all the different ways that you are defining community, whether that's family or work. Um, and I really like the concept of radical self care. We talked about this in the last episode, but thinking about it as an act of resistance in and of itself, right? Um, and that, as you mentioned, like, we live in these societies that are really built in a way that can cause us harm. So it's so important that we have this extra effort and intentionality around caring for ourselves so that we can continue to do this good work. So it's not an act of selfishness, it's really an act of compassion for ourselves and allows us to have compassion for others. But it's really hard to do. Do you kind of want to give, some examples of um, how you actively do that in your practice? Like, when you
Mhm.
might be at work or at home, like, what are the things that you specifically do for
Mhm.
radical self care?
Thank you. And one thing that I would mention, I can't remember everything we talked about last time, but for people who maybe didn't listen to that episode yet either, um, would be in 2007 when I started practicing, I did also get a coach, a life and leadership coach. Some people use executive coaches, other types of coaches. And for me, that was a really important support in terms of both tapping into my own wisdom but challenging the limiting beliefs that I had. And so, one that I've mentioned is I actually believed that I needed to be exhausted and pouring every ounce of myself and my energy into the work, as part of my role as an Indigenous physician and community member and an activist. Uh, and so it took a fair bit of work, actually, and supported work to let that idea go and instead shift that to embrace this idea of happiness and joy and health for myself as well. Um, And in addition to thinking about that as an active resistance, I would also think about it as a counter narrative, right? To the way that we are portrayed as people who are vulnerable, who are sicker, who have higher rates of mental health or addiction issues, that we all are at risk of really internalizing that and believing that not just for our community members, but for ourselves too. So this counter narrative where I actually have a right to be healthy and I can be healthy and I am healthy is really fundamentally important. So the coaching was really important for me to let go of those internalized notions and shift my beliefs to the ones that then um, created the opportunity for me to do this radical self-care, because we're not going to put the effort into that if we don't actually believe it's going to lead to a meaningful goal or outcome.
Yes,
I shouldn't say that.
exactly.
Other people might think about it differently. I'm very goal
Yes, so am I. Fair,
oriented. Right.
fair. Everybody's
Yeah.
different, but you and I have that in common. Yes.
Yes, it is going to lead somewhere, and it's going to lead somewhere important and somewhere that we are worthy of. So, in addition to coaching, some of the really specific things that I do personally, one thing that I try really hard to do, and this is something that I've identified more in the past year, is every day I either need to have an actual break in my work day, so 30 minutes or an hour or something. I mean, we all know that doesn't always happen, but I either need an actual break where I step away and I go for a walk, or I need to have at least one meeting where I feel completely safe about a topic that gives me energy and is with people I really love, you know? And in an ideal setting, it would be both at least. But the days that I have one or the other of those, at least, those days are noticeably better for me. And I mention that as a specific example because of how important calendaring is, and thinking about how our calendars and our appointments either can build energy over the day, take energy away, or more likely some up and down balance of both. So that's one really specific thing that I find helpful.
That is really cool about just like being intentional about kind of scheduling that in. Okay. What else? What else do you do?
Okay. So I've been unwell for the last few weeks, but I also work out 4 or 5 times a week. I need the physical movement. I need to be out of my head and in my body, and I need the endorphins from it. So for me, my preferred form of workout for the last couple of years has been CrossFit. So high intensity training, lots of strength training. But yes, 4 or 5 times a week, I work out pretty hard.
Right. So that's intense. So that is not for everybody, but
Well, and I'll also just mention I've gone through phases where I've mainly run or mainly walked or mainly done yoga. And so I think that's the other piece of it, is paying attention to what is it your body actually needs from movement, right?
Mhm,
And taking into account your context and what's available to you. Um, but your body will need different things at different points in time. Sometimes it may need more aggressive type workouts, and sometimes it may need more relaxing type of workouts. Um, and so I think it's important not to be too attached to anything, but to really check in uh, and be intentional also about what is the movement that is going to nourish you and bring you joy
mhm.
today.
Yes, today. I was going to say because for me, it doesn't just vary like over a long period of time. It can actually vary depending on the day. So there are days when so I'm committed to movement, especially, in the context of pandemic where a lot of us are at home. Um, so some days it's like, you know what, I'm a bit exhausted. I'm going to do some stretching and just connect with myself. Other times it's like, I need to get my heart rate up and I ain't got no time. I woke up late. I'm going to do like I do on YouTube, the 7-minute scientific exercise because it's like 7 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
gets my heart rate up. It's been like peer reviewed, so I'm good. And then actually this morning, I had a number of different things I needed to work on. So it was a decision that I wasn't going to work out as much, but I felt like I needed like an extra boost of joy. So I like took calypso, so like soca zumba. So just two quick, videos. And so my one of my 3-year old is used to watching me like work out with weights in the morning or do the 7 minute. So I put on, the soca, and but it's still a Zumba routine. And he was like, I thought you were going to exercise. And I'm like, he's like, no. Then he goes, this looks like dancing. Right. And I'm like, dancing is exercise. And he was like, oh. And then he's just like sucking his finger, watching. He's like looking at the screen, looking at me do the moves. And then when my 4-year old comes downstairs, he's like, Jaden, he's like, dancing is exercise. And I was like, okay, I taught him something today, right? Like our culture is
Mm-hmm.
exercise. Good. But there's that piece of like figuring out what works on whatever particular day. And I guess the
Mm-hmm.
other piece that I kind of unintentionally did was the role modeling, right? So it's good when
Mm-hmm.
people see us take care of ourselves in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is with radical self-care, you need the biggest toolbox possible, so that you have a lot of different things you can pull out, um, to respond to your different needs, your different contexts, the different time. So a couple other things for sure. Dancing, I really miss going dancing. Pre-COVID, I would go to QPOC, so Queer People of Color in Winnipeg, had a ladies' night.
Wait, say that again. I
First
love that name. Did you say QPOC?
QPOC,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. So Queer People of Color, they would sponsor a ladies' night at Club 200 the first Saturday of every month. So that was like main joy for me for sure. But yeah, so dancing either on my own, mostly with the kids now. I think dancing cannot be overstated in terms of how good it is.
Yeah.
Like the music, the movement, the community, the fun. So yes, dancing. I I do gratitude journaling every day. Or I try to be disciplined enough to do it every day. Write at least 3 things that I'm thankful for.
That's what I do too. So you do the
Yeah.
3 things? Because I don't always have time to write a whole essay. You do the 3 things?
Oh yeah, I went to bullets.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
at bullets
bullet
too.
points.
I'm in a hurry, but yes, there's good evidence for it, right? So how long have you been
Yeah.
gratitude journaling?
I would say off and on for a couple years, but pretty consistently, especially this past year. This year, what I also did was I bought one of those larger size day planners. And so just in the box for every day, I write my 3 or however many bullet points about things that I'm grateful for, because then it's like super streamlined. I still have that moment where I pause and I think, but it doesn't feel like, oh, okay, I got to sit down and write 10 pages in my journal, which is just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I use a day planner to make it even easier.
That is cool. I have been inconsistent. Like I took it's free, but the Yale like science of what is it? Science of well-being course, right? So it's on like
Mm.
different practices for happiness. So that was last summer, online free course. And so it had the gratitude journaling. So I did it for a while, but it was like this long essay, like you said, and then I couldn't keep it up. And then I was doing it, it kind of fell off. And then, like, most recently, I was feeling a little bit low, maybe like a month ago. And I was like, okay, I need all of the things with intention. So then it became, okay, monitoring my sleep, bullet point gratitude journal every day, making sure I do the exercise meditation every day, even if it's 5 minutes, and then being mindful of my diet. So I don't know, you can decide to defer, but the way I eat now is also part of my approach to self care. I don't eat perfectly, so I'm not claiming that, but I try to be more intentional about it and actually more plant based. So I think about culture and I think about like basically given the kind of blood boiling impact of like systemic racism, patriarchy, and other things I have to deal with that doesn't mix well with like steak or fried chicken as far as I'm concerned in my blood in my blood vessels. So I am perfectly happy to think about tradition and like rice, chickpeas, some
Hmm.
plantain, some okra, and I'm like, yes, that is some self care right there. But yes, so that has been my general approach.
Hmm.
Not perfect, but that's how I've been doing it. But for you, is diet part of your self care plan as well?
It is, and I think like a lot of people, it goes up and down for me. I think it's self-care in general really requires a lot of self-discipline. And because there's so much layered into diet, weight, and food, I think this is one that is more challenging for me in terms of not wanting to get rigid or obsessive or unhealthy in how I think about it. For sure, I feel better the less processed food and less sugar that I eat. So those are my two main things. I watched the documentary about the plant-based food and I wanted to try it. And to be honest, I just really love steak and cheese and things like that. So, yeah,
Okay,
for me,
yes.
it's mainly trying to avoid the processed food and the sugar. But again, the last few weeks have been rougher. I've not been as good about it, but it's something that's been on my mind again. You know, I'm on call until Monday. So to be honest, I'm like, I'm not making any big changes till Monday, but then on Monday, I'm going to start, cutting back the sugar again. The other thing that I do on a regular basis and will be reincorporating is the intermittent fasting. I find that actually really helpful for my energy levels um, as well.
Yeah, so
So,
again, everybody does their own thing. My girl in Nigeria was talking
mhm.
to me about intermittent fasting. I was like, no, I need to eat every 5 minutes. Like, I'm not doing no intermittent. I told my girl, like Uche is gonna laugh when I told her, I was like, look, even if doing that intermittent fasting, I will do it, and somebody will tell me you will look like Halle Berry, like you will look like Beyonce, like 100%, or Lupita. Let's not just do light skin, Lupita, whoever. It is not worth it to me. I need to eat all day, all the time. I will eat healthy. I will eat some almonds. I'll eat a banana. I'll have,
Mhm.
hummus. But no. So good for you with your intermittent, but
Yeah,
no.
and sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. And I think it's the same principle as the exercise is I do when it's causing me more stress, um, compared to the benefits to my energy level or whatever that I'm getting, then I don't do it.
Yes.
Um,
I mean, the
so,
message here is figure out what works for you when it works for you.
mhm,
And if it's not working for
mhm,
you anymore, figure out something else. But the idea is finding
mhm,
healthy ways to take care of yourself. Now, I'm going to ask you a
mhm,
question because um, two things I was thinking about with regards to, like I talked about compassion, but thinking about love. We haven't talked about love very much on Race, Health, and Happiness. And it dawned on me last night when I was watching this really cool YouTube clip with the late, great Dr. Maya Angelou, African American poet, and James Baldwin, African American author. And so she was interviewing him, and it was just a very again, centering the margins kind of talk, really, for like African American community. And they both passed away, but it was just so beautiful. Like they talked about life and so many pieces, but talked about the influence of like family love and community love and different forms of love and how that sustained them and how fluid that is. And it had me reflecting also on, again, a lecture that we had in the medical class, and we were talking about self-care, and Dr. Nanki Rai, who's one of our colleagues that we both know, she said, what about community care? And so I paused because I was like, as physicians, we're constantly, and mothers and women and all these different identities we hold, giving to community, but not taking the time for self-care. But she meant the opposite. She meant where we ask for help from community, where
mhm.
we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and do that for self-care, like reach out. So are there ways, because to me that's love as well. It's love of self, it's
Mhm.
love of community, it's making yourself vulnerable. Are there ways that you practice that? Because I was thinking about that.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on
You,
that?
okay, great question. You know, one thing I just want to say first, from the previous discussion, and then I'm going to answer this specific question about love, is sleep is so fundamentally important. And I don't sleep well, but I also don't hesitate to reach out for help. And I think, the importance of routine medical care or getting appropriate health care as well. So, just to share that I did actually make an appointment and talk to my physician last week to get more assistance with sleep because it's really the foundation for everything else in the whole self care and well being field. Um, and I think it's an aspect of reaching out for help too. So I just
Yes,
wanted
absolutely.
to to mention that as something that's, an important part of my self-care as well.
Yes,
So,
reaching out
and
for medical help is that piece, right? That's part of it.
mhm.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Okay. So, in terms of love and community love, I feel so fortunate um, in the family context that I was raised in, where, large extended family. Um, we kind of the kinship relationships are different, right? Where it's not so much this is your first cousin or your dad's cousin, that's your auntie, your cousin's more like your sibling. So those tighter bonds, I think set for me a lesson in what would nurture me and what I would need moving forward um, in that regard. So, still to this day, my family is so incredibly helpful, and I help my family, and I let my family help them, especially my parents, right? So they help with my kids. They'll pick up our groceries when I order online. Like I let my family help me. I would really welcome more help with my laundry. But anyone
Well, I
wanted
hope
to
they're
volunteer
listening.
for
It's
that,
official request.
Yeah. um, and then in terms of some of the community stuff, I'd mentioned to you before, one of the things I'd been participating in since the pandemic is what we call COVID Convos at Sunshine House, which is a community organization in Winnipeg. Serves a lot of Indigenous community, a lot of queer community, newcomer um, community. So uh, going there once a week now, about once every 2 weeks, and not necessarily going there because we're in a pretty tough lockdown. Um, Connecting there to have conversation. It is on Facebook Live, so sharing those moments with those parts of the community. But again, being there, talking honestly before and after the session about how the week is going, and just getting that friend support, like to me, that is such a critical part of it. And to have those relationships where you have built enough trust where you can actually talk openly about what's going on. When we work inside the systems, it can be really, I feel cautious about how much I share about the system work with people not in the system, but at the same time, there's not a lot of people in the system that I would trust to talk about how the system is impacting me as a person. And so that is a major part of what my kind of my the community love aspect is, having that confidence and that level of trust in order to share really openly about what is going on and how it's impacting me, so I can kind of receive that support. And the number of times people reach out just to tell me you're doing a great job, we really appreciate you, um, and receiving those messages graciously, thanking them for the
Yes.
message, but also saying you're welcome when they are thanking me for the work. Um,
Yes.
so, yeah, those are a few of the thoughts.
I love that last statement you said about like receiving the compliment because I don't know like where all of that comes from, and probably different cultures are different about it. So I'm going to respect that. But I would say kind of like at least dominant culture or Western culture, a lot of it is like to say, oh no, I don't want to take the compliment kind of thing. But most recently, I feel like, again, like for us who experience different forms of like microaggressions and all types of things in the day to day lives, when a compliment comes, that is love. And it's okay to receive that love and to say, thank you. You're recognizing my gifts. And I too recognize your gifts. And like you said, it's reciprocity. And so I've started to kind of receive it because that then fills me up. Not to become like conceited, so not overfilled, but like sometimes running on empty, and to say, oh, thank you for recognizing that gift. And so now I can continue to share that. So, and then continue to give the compliments and pay it forward, either to that person or to others. So I think that's so important to feel comfortable accepting, because I think sometimes that's a thing that we always don't want to accept. Um, and then, yeah, what you mentioned, like being able to ask for the help. I wanted to ask your perspective on that because I think so often, either as physicians or again, like as women, and this of course happens to, I guess, with toxic masculinity as well. So I don't want to say it like gendered, but toxic masculinity in whatever form it occurs, of not wanting to accept help. And it's so important to like receive and get, like this whole reciprocity that is love for self and community and others and coworkers. So I think that's really cool how you have those spaces, and you talked about like making space in your day for having those safe spaces to do that. And I'm encouraging like students and others to be mindful of that as well. It's so important for our wellness to, connect in that way and be humble and vulnerable, right? And it can be hurtful sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
right? Asking for help. Sometimes people are going through their own thing or whatever it is, and they can't provide that. But it still is so important to find those opportunities for exchange. Um, yeah.
And I would just say, outside of my family, I'm going to be totally honest, I am not great at asking for help. Where I've made the most progress is on being willing to receive it when people offer it. So I could grow more still in my ability to reach out and ask for help. But when, an elder or knowledge keeper reaches out and lets me know they're praying for me, I love that kind of help and the love that that shows. If someone offers to pick up my kids for a while or drop off a meal or anything like that, um, very willing to, or more willing now at least to acknowledge that I need the help. I remember one time, it's maybe 2 years ago, about 2 years ago, it was like February, and there was some significant stuff going on in the community. And a couple of my friends reached out and asked if there was anything they could do to help. And to be honest, my Christmas tree was still up. So I thought, I'm just going to put it out there. I said I could use a lot of help taking down my Christmas tree and my decorations. And they actually came and did it and brought a meal too.
Oh.
And so that really genuine offer from them to help, but then also being willing to help in the way that I needed it,
Mm-hmm.
um, was a real lesson, right? And so I think that's part of the balance is what is the help you need and what is the help somebody can offer,
Mm-hmm.
and finding that matching spot, and then being grateful both for the ability to receive, and to offer help when you can too.
Yes.
So the
Actually,
Christmas tree story was pretty foundational for me, and
and it is those stories, right? That friends would come and be like, "Yeah, we're gonna, help you this and bring food." Um, and for me, actually, just you telling that story reminded me of a story between us, right? Like when because where you talk about thinking about where people are able, what people are able to give, and so you remember, I'm sure, um, at the height of the in the middle of COVID-19, after the death of George Floyd and I guess this wave of awareness in mainstream kind of white Canadian society, but also across the world around anti-Black
mm-hmm,
racism,
mm-hmm,
resulted in a number of demands of my time, but also, so coming from kind of leadership in different areas that I work, but also a huge wave of pain coming from my Black peers and colleagues, and particularly learners from across the
mm-hmm,
country, of people's stories now that they had suppressed and kind of learned to kind of live with because they felt nobody would listen, or they had tried to ask for help and people had ignored them. Now they were being asked to tell their stories. Now they were having vicarious traumatization from watching the
mm-hmm,
death of George Floyd. And so there was a lot of mobilizing that needed to be done. But also, having done this work myself for so many years and people not really listening to like what anti-Black racism is and everything else like
mm-hmm,
that, I felt extremely exhausted. It felt like one of my colleagues put it well, like you're at a funeral and somebody comes and says, "Oh no, but we have like what went into this person's death. We have to go. We have," and is asking you all these questions, and it's like, let's just take a moment. We are like dealing with grief. And
mm-hmm,
so I didn't know how to process that grief. And I felt like a lot of my Black colleagues who had experienced anti-Black racism weren't going to be in a position to provide support. And so I was thinking, who knows something? And I was like, okay, Marcia has a coach, because I was also cognizant of the fact that you're, as an Indigenous woman and physician, and dealing with colonization every day. And so I didn't want to
mm-hmm,
burden you, but I remember kind of calling you a little bit half crying and being like, I just want to know if you have bandwidth or space to speak to me for a
mm-hmm,
moment. And I don't even want to like take up your own brain space. I just want to know something that perhaps a coach has told you at some point where you feel like, why do I even bother to do this work if it's not making a difference? Because that's how it felt at that moment, right? Like, if it just, why has nothing changed over the last century? It was the feeling that I had in that moment. Do you remember what you said to me?
I remember the conversation, but no, I don't even remember exactly what I told you.
It is okay, because that was like
Yeah.
a critical moment for me, right? You had said,
Yeah.
first of all, that you had space. You said, I give you permission to kind of just have this conversation. I have space today. And I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness. And you were like, you know, do you think that in this generation you will be able to be free? Right. And I asked you, what do you mean by free? Because prior to that, I thought of free as like direct bondage or slavery or something like that. And you're like, free, like where you can just be treated in society as a regular person. And I was like, no, I don't think that can happen in my lifetime. I'm seen as a label. I experience anti-Black racism in every form, in my everyday life. And you said, okay, what about children or grandchildren? And I was like, well, maybe my grandchildren. And you were like, right. So if every day we do this work, we do it for the hopes that our children and our children's children can be free. There is value in this. We are not in the position of our ancestors. We stand on the shoulders of giants who did this hard work, and we must continue to do this work and have faith. And in that moment, I was like, right. Like, and it's part of kind of like remembering one's own wisdom. Like, I have said things like that, sort of, not in the way you put it in the past, but in that moment of despair, I remembered. You helped me to remember why this work is so important, and all of those who have come before us that have done this work, and why we need to continue. And so, but in the context that you put it about freedom, then all of a sudden it clicked, because I had been listening to a Black Lives Matter playlist, and there was a song by Nina Simone about freedom. And I always wondered why she wrote it, because during her lifetime, it wasn't like a slavery context song. And I was able to re-listen to it and understand. In that moment, I understood, because she had wanted to be a classical singer, but people couldn't see that because she was a Black woman. So she had to do R&B. But she, in the song, talks about what it is like to be free. And she's talking about just being seen as a human being. And so I really want to thank you for that moment, because that was me reaching out for help. And I had to think really deeply about who could offer that. And I really appreciate you bringing those lessons that you learned from your coach. And to me, like, again, new friend, we have not known each other forever, but it feels like home when we are together. And I just really want to thank you for that. That was a critical moment and meant very much to me. And to me, that is love. So I thank you.
You're welcome. And I love hearing that story again. And of course, it does bring back the conversation. And to me, there are, two real critical parts of it, in addition to what you've shared. And there's overlap, actually. But one is that a critical part of self-care is knowing what our piece of the work is. Our piece of the work is not necessarily going to get the ball over the end line, but our piece of the work is incredibly valuable. And so we have to measure not necessarily about the end goal, but what our piece in getting to the end goal is, right? And then the second piece was just that in offering help to others, it has to be focused on what they need in the moment, right? Because if it starts to feel like it creates more work for them, then it's not help anymore. So
Yes.
I just think that's the other thing
I think
that example showed. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thinking about what your piece of that work is. And in the context of self-care, then allowing other people to do the other pieces of the work, and knowing that we won't solve it immediately, but we're making progress, and actually giving people, identifying what they need. So with that, I think this is the perfect ending to this episode. And Marcia, I thank you so much for being my guest on Race, Health, and Happiness.
Thank you.
The Race, Health, and Happiness podcast was created by Dr. Onye, and she's our host. The show is produced, edited, and engineered by yours truly, Dr. Carl Cabasel. Our technical producer is Obadiah George. Awit Siam is our research and resource manager, and Sindhu Senthil Mohan is our medical research consultant. Promotions coordinator is Jordan Gibson, and social media coordinator is Latoya Powell. Javiera Gutierrez Duran is our logistics coordinator, and JL Joseph is our production intern. The RHH theme song, it's composed and performed by Gold Keys, and graphic design for the podcast is handled by Veronica Michelle. Do you have questions, feedback, ideas to share? We'd love to hear from you. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at RaceHealth&Happy. Our website is RaceHealth&Happiness.com. Thank you for listening to Race, Health, and Happiness, and please subscribe to us anywhere you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel, and we'll talk with you soon.